I'm kind of pitching myself here as somebody who's an experienced investor, but always, I'm definitely new to this business as well. I just want to speak about this product and just how much, it has really helped me, propel myself, get better with talking with sellers, actually be able to close a deal. My strategies right now have been primarily direct mail, cold calling, and cold texting, and I've found a lot of success with Real Estate IQ, especially being able to get in front of customers, have engaging conversations, and of course, I'm hoping to use all of that to build my own business and eventually retire off.
Excited to be here, and I want to say a big thank you to Real Estate IQ. They have the absolute top leads in the industry and just make investing effortless for all of us as real estate investors here in Texas and obviously everywhere else that they're focused. And I'm proud to be associated with Real Estate IQ. Love what you guys do and love how you all help investors so that we can focus on the thing that makes us the most money, which is the job of real estate investing.
I wanted to jump on this morning and give a shout out to Real Estate IQ.
Oh, there we go. It says we're on, but I don't know if that just means that the facility. Oh, I kept trying to. What's that? Sure. Oh, Peter! Pete from Toronto. Wonderful.
Okay. Thank you. There we go.
There we go.
Okay.
Where's everyone from that's logged in so far? Let us know in the comments.
Toronto, Peter.
That's our borrower.
Yep, one from
Yeah.
California.
Remember
Miss
Peter.
Shay.
Oh, thanks, Hazel. I'll take it. It's our production crew that has us looking good. We're under ring lights and all the things.
Houston, Texas.
Here we go. Hometown for us.
Ohio.
Ohio.
Okay. What part of Ohio? I'm going to guess Columbus, Patricia.
She doesn't want to lose.
No. Dayton. Okay. Not too far.
Have we done anything in Dayton?
Yeah, we actually have one on the funded board right now with Tom or Todd, Arizona.
Oh, hey Jay, how are you? It's nice to see you. Sort of. You know who Jay Tenenbaum is, right?
Sounds very familiar.
That's
Another borrower,
our
right?
Pennsylvania investor.
Okay. What's going on, Jay? I don't. Just looks good. Oh. We can definitely help with that, Cassandra.
That's an easy ask, especially in Houston.
Sorry.
Oh, there's no intro. Okay. Okay. Sounds good. Are we ready? Yes,
Okay.
we're all
Thank you.
set. Pull up our own slides.
Pull it up on that. That will just do ours.
Can y'all see our slide deck at all? Or is it just our faces still? There we go.
There we
Perfect.
go.
All right. So thank you everyone for logging into Flipco's version of understanding the underwriting process. I'm Kayla Pelland. I'm the VP over at Flipco Financial. And really today, I'm going to be handing a lot of the information over to Mike Kennedy to present. He's our senior asset underwriter, and he really is the guy who drives all of our underwriting decisions here. Quick agenda for this morning is we're going to go through just introducing Flipco quickly, what qualifying a property looks like. I will touch on briefly as we work through what underwriting submissions look like for Flipco. But today we really want to focus on how you as an investor can look at underwriting your properties and not so much about what it looks like on the Flipco side. Of course, we want you to be really well equipped for when you submit a loan to us and understand what we're looking for. But the goal here is so that when you're investing in your own backyards, you're able to look at comps and properly evaluate properties to set yourself up for success. So a little bit about Flipco before we dive into who we are. Flipco is a hard money asset-based lender out of Houston, Texas. We do lend throughout several states now currently, but we did start in Houston back in 2020. Our flagship product is a short-term fix and flip loan. So I'm sure most of you on here are familiar with what a fix and flip loan is, but essentially these are loans that are very low doc, quick closing, and established to provide a borrower with the best circumstances for closing on a property, renovating it, and then selling it for a profit. We are balance sheet lenders. So what that means is that we hold all of our assets in-house. And so we don't sell your loan. We service them all the way through from origination to your sale at the end of it. And as we work through explaining to you how we underwrite properties, you'll come to understand the difference that means for a lender like us. We really take pride in what assets we lend on because we're partners with you through that entire project. And realistically, your success in that project is ours, but that all starts with the asset. As I mentioned, I'm the VP here. I do come from a background of real estate and investing predominantly. Peter is a fellow Canadian on this webinar today. I'm also from Canada. I moved here about 6 years ago and invested back in Ontario previously. Really, that's the only thing that I've done since I've come to Houston, and then started leading the Flipco team in our family office in early 2021. Mike Kennedy, as I mentioned, does run our asset management team, and he can give you a little background on himself.
Yeah, sure. So I got my real estate license in 2016. Started out just doing the retail side of the business, which I found out very quickly I did not like. Quickly transferred onto the investment side and got into a big wholesaling operation. Did that for about 3.5 years. Then transferred into the flipping side of the business, where I got to see a lot of the acquisitions, dispositions of how deals actually move. And when you actually put your own money into a deal and not just wholesaling things, it completely opens up a whole new world for you. And then back in 2021, I came over to join Flipco as a director of business development. Took the product that was just in Houston, Texas, to about 8 different states where we lend now. So that's been kind of the progress. So kind of seen it all, to be honest.
So just to touch on what an asset-based lender is again, the purpose of being an asset-based lender, or what I also explain to people is why we say we're a hard money lender, is because our lending is based on the hard asset itself. So we're really looking at evaluating the property first and foremost when we're making a lending decision. We're looking at 3 main things. So first, we want to make sure that your initial acquisition price makes sense. Is it in line with the market that you're purchasing in and the current condition of the property? Next, we take a look at your renovation costs or your rehab budget. And that's a big part of our underwriting process in-house. We want to make sure that what you plan to do to that property aligns with the current condition. And then most importantly, lines up with what you think the after repair value is going to be. And a lot of the focus today is going to be on how we establish what that after repair value, or ARV, is. That's something you'll hear throughout this entire presentation. But mainly, we need to make sure that if you think a property is going to be worth $300,000 in 6 months from now, does the market tell us that same story? And Mike's going to dive into really the weeds of how to pull those comparable properties to make sure that when you're looking at that number, you're actually using data and analytics behind these numbers that you're going to be pulling. We don't rely as heavily on your financial history, your credit, your background necessarily. Of course, we want to make sure that if you're planning on pulling off a huge rehab, you have the expertise or support behind you to do a $200,000 rehab. But really, as a true asset-based lender, we're looking to that property first and foremost, and then figuring out the best way to support you through the project to make sure that you're successful. So when determining ARV, I've touched on some of this already, but we're going to be looking at the current state of the property. So again, when we're focusing on these steps for running comparables, you're going to want to use those same tips and tools when you're determining the as-is value. I think we'll probably walk through it a little bit more on an ARV basis, but you can use the same guiding principles when you're determining what you should even offer on the property in the first place. If we have time, we can even touch on, once you establish the ARV, how sometimes you have to back into that acquisitions price, because you may come to realize that they don't align after everything's said and done. Again, we look at your proposed rehab budget. That's important for you too. You can't go and pull a comp if you don't know if you plan on putting carpet or hardwood in a property, or granite or quartz, for example. So understanding what you plan to do for a rehab. Obviously, you're looking at recent sales for that. We'll go through that. And then we'll explain to you how to calculate based on average price per square foot. I do want to make note to this, because we have such a widespread variety of borrowers or investors on this call. Not every state, or frankly, even every country, uses price per square foot. So when I first came here to Houston specifically and started evaluating properties, it was new to me to see how much we rely on, whether it's a rental or not, it's always price per square foot. So in your market, it's important to understand if other investors or realtors do not, or even appraisers for that matter, if they don't use price per square foot, you can still use these same guiding principles, but you'll likely be just working off the total sale price versus that price per square foot. So just a nuance to keep track of. That's how we do it here, but not. You didn't know that?
No,
oh, yes.
I didn't.
And I don't know if Peter would say the same thing in Toronto, but back in Ontario, we never used price per square foot when we were evaluating property. It's a lot easier. I wish we did, but as a realtor there, that's not what we used. So really quick, just running through this because this is a little bit more specific to Flipco. You can jump in on any of it as well as we go. But these are the states that Flipco is actively lending in. We're always looking at adding new states, especially if they're super investor friendly or we think there's opportunity there. Jay's on this call as well. He's a perfect example of an investor who's kind of pushing us into new states, and we're excited. Some of the things that we try to follow is making sure that we're within an hour of a major MSA. Some people really love those rural niche areas. We're not saying not to do that. As a lender, we only have so much capacity. So if we need to go and visit a property and it's 8 hours from an airport, that gets a little bit tricky for us. But again, knowing your market is really what we're trying to drive home there. We do specialize in single family residential units. We will go up to 10 units on that, but really the 1 to 4 is kind of our bread and butter over here. Again, figure out what your specialty is. And you can use, again, these same tools you can use on multifamily as well, or looking for rental prices. And we do go up to 1 million. Ooh, we have a question. We do commercial through our sister company, which is called Bridgeco. They are Texas based only right now. We do have some flexibility. For example, like we could do 5 or 6 units in Georgia through Flipco, but we won't do like a standard commercial, like office, retail, anything like that outside of Texas yet. If anybody has questions, I'm happy to see they pop up. So just
We'll try to get them as they come.
Yeah. Just make it interactive. We're happy to do that. Is there anything you want to touch on kind of how we qualify?
No, I would just say within the 1 hour of the MSA, that's strictly a logistical thing. As far as you go more rural, there seems to be less comp. So that's really just for us. If things, the inevitability that things do potentially can go wrong on a hard money loan, it's part of the risk, it's part of the asset. We just like to be able to get to that asset, get eyes. So just really logistics thing on the 1 hour part. So.
And when y'all are talking about, thank you, Jay. When you're talking to other lenders, of course, we would love to be the first call that you make, but maybe you're investing in, in New York and we don't lend there yet. It is important to just understand what your lender's buy box is, and also asking them how they underwrite properties, whether they use an appraiser or not. We should mention we don't use third-party appraisals, which is why we consider our asset underwriting to be such an important piece of our overall lending operation. I mean, if not the most critical, frankly. Some other lenders, and frankly, most other lenders do use third-party appraisers. We don't use third-party appraisers for any of our underwriting. And so we'll go through this. Again, Mike will throw it back to making comparisons as we go. Like, hey, we only do it this way. An appraiser may do X, Y, or Z. So important to know, first and foremost, when you're talking to a new lender, do you do third-party appraisals or do you do your underwriting in-house? All right, so jumping into it. So these are the main ways that we qualify properties. I have no problem sharing this slide deck after the fact either. So if anybody wants a copy of it, like, don't feel like you have to sit there and take screenshots or anything. But these are all of the pieces that we're going to run through today with you, giving you examples along the way. So first thing that we're looking for is we want to see at least 3 comparables. So why 3?
For me personally, and it's not going to be anything that's set in stone, but if you do go back to more of we do desktop BPOs, but the appraiser will always, the standard is 3 typically, and that's just strictly by the appraiser. I go by that route. It really depends on the area. Sometimes I have no problem with going 2 sold comps and 1 pending.
That was my next question.
I like to be able to see that there's traction in the area. And if we go to an area and there's more actives than there are solds, you kind of have to take a big picture aspect of it. So always the one thing that we do from the appraiser mindset is getting 3 comps, but that's not an end all be all. The problem is if you only have 1 comparable and 1 comp, it's really tough to hang your hat on that that value is actually there. It could just be a one-off. It could just be that the market's transitioning there. So it's more of just a confidence building thing when you see 3 comps in each area. Yes. Yeah.
Touched on if you have something that's active or pending. We've seen borrowers who sometimes will say, hey, these are my 3 comps and this is why I think the value is X, and they're all 3 actives or 3 pendings. Yeah. How do you or your team kind of look at that?
I typically like to see a 2-to-1 ratio of solds to active. And if it's the flip flop where there's double the actives and there's just solds, and that shows me that there's a surplus of inventory. I look at the days on market. That's another really big thing to say, hey, what's the average days on market for how fast these properties are moving? Anything over 60 to 90 can kind of be a concern in my eyes going, why are properties sitting? Granted, it is tough sometimes. We are looking at properties via computer screen and not actually walking them, where it could be fully updated. It might look nice, but you really haven't been able to walk that property and see how well the craftsmanship were. Did they actually add that second bedroom or half bath, whatever it's say the MLS listing might say it is, just confirming some of those things. So I would say that's another reason why. Okay.
Really just looking for trends, I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? Okay. So a lot of this, I'm going to head over to Mike, but I like to interrupt and clarify. So if anybody else has questions as we go through, feel free. But first thing we're looking at when we're narrowing down is sold date. How do we work through that?
So this is actually, we're at 6 months now. So we only go back up to 6 months. But at the same time, I go back 12, I go back 9, and then I go back 6 because I want to see the
You
trends.
reach more too.
Yes.
Okay.
So I start 12. I get a full picture of in the past year, what's changed. If there's any big distinctions from 12 to 9 months and values are changing by 20 to 30,000, that light bulb kind of goes off. But 6 and even 3 months is going to be the freshest, best data you can possibly have. We've done this statistically over going back 12 months and seeing how the values change, going back 9, going back 6. We do flex it out, like I said, but typically the 3 to 6 months are always going to be the best of the best. So
Right.
just the freshest comps that are there.
And then is this when you would start to establish if there's a trend in that market,
Yeah.
depreciating, appreciating, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So, I mean, even last year when we were going back a full year, really, I saw a big change in like the May to June of 2024, where values started to come down by maybe even 10 to 15%. So if you see those, you just have to understand what's going on in the market. Could just be a saturation, could it be a surplus of inventory as well as days on market. If you see trends where more active properties are coming on the market, there's going to be high days on market and properties are just taking longer overall to sell, then you just have to be aware of those types of things. But typically, again, if you go back 3 months and there's no data whatsoever, and you go back 6 months and you see that there's starting to be some data, well, then go look at the active properties and see how many are on there. Maybe just in the past 3 months, something's changed. So you just have to be mindful of those types of things. So,
And then even as an investor too, keeping in mind, this is an investment property. So if you're seeing those days on market trending up, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad market or a bad deal, but that's something to be cognizant of. How long is your loan term? Should you anticipate an extension? What's your cost of capital going to look like?
Yep.
It's important, some areas it's totally normal that it takes 90 to 120 days just to sell. So you're going to have an additional holding cost there to consider as well. So all things that you're going to want to just be able to be prepared for. From there, we take a look at bed and bath count as well. How do you account for that, or where's the flex generally?
yeah. So if you have a 3-bed, 2-bath and you're not adding a bedroom or not adding a bathroom, I'm simply going to stick with 3 beds, 2 baths. I won't go up to a 4. Reason why is if you go out and look at 4 beds, 2 baths, you will see a distinction in price. You will see 20 to 30,000 goes up. I'd also look at the garages, and this is the tough part, is I can't sit here and say every time I comp a 3.2 and then I comp a 4.2, it's going to be $20,000. Or every time there's a garage and there's not a garage, it's $30,000. One of the biggest ones is pools. Everyone says a pool can increase the value, and I would agree with that. But if you don't statistically see the jumps in price and you have a 3.2, that's a 4.2, that's within 300 square feet, it's really tough to make that distinction. But generally, you will see, of course, that a 4-bed will sell more than 3-bed. So I do not comp to 4 beds. If it's a 3.2, I'm strictly sticking with that.
Right.
I may even go down to a 2.2 or a 2.1 if they've fully updated and it looks nice, but I'm not going to go up to that next bracket. So that's just a protection level and being a little bit more conservative. Some people will, a wholesaler might, a realtor might, but you kind of have to look
We're not
at it.
trying to be shady, I promise.
Yes, you kind of have to look at it each different way, and not cherry pick is what we like to say. So,
okay. And so I know that we'll go through in a couple slides, we're going to talk about this. Actually, the next one will be square footage. We can jump over to that, but I think we need to make the distinction because we're saying, hey, we're pricing but per square foot, but then at the same time, we're taking into consideration some of those features as well.
Yeah.
So we're narrowing down by bed bath count, then working off the price per square foot. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
But also kind of like you said, I mean, generally, if you're just doing the math simply, if you have a 1,500 square foot house and then you're comping, 1,500 going 12 to 1,800, the price per square foot will vary and change. So if I have an 1,800 square foot house, but I'm comping to the 1,200 square price per square foot, then there's going to be a big variance there, a big difference there. So you have to just be mindful of those things. The best is to get as close as possible to square footage, the closest price per square foot. And I actually look at it a couple different ways as far as how to, what you call the top. So if a 1,200 square foot house sold for 270, but you have a 1,500 square foot house, I'm not just going to take that and say, okay, well, now we're 295 because it's a higher price per square foot just because based off the square footage. I'm more conservative and say, hey, the top of the market consistently is 270 to 275. I may give it a quick bump of 10 to 15K, but I'm not going to then give it the 30K just because you'll hear that all the time. Well, we have more square footage. Inevitably, yes, you can, but if the market is telling you it tops out at 270 just because you have more square feet and then the higher price per square foot doesn't generally mean that you can get that. We're not in the business of comping stuff to reset the market. A lot of people, that's a big thing that happens with us is, well, I'm going to come in here. I'm going to be the first person. I'm going to reset the market. And it's just like, at the end of the day, underwriting is taking previous data to make a prediction pretty much.
Right.
Markets change, price per square foot's change, everything can change super quickly. So really, at the end of the day, we're taking data to guess a future value. So we can only use what we have, and we're not in the business of resetting the market. I would love for people to prove us wrong, and we've had some people.
They do. For the record, like, we love nothing more. I love nothing more than when a borrower comes back and throws in our face that they did success. Like, I can think of people off the top of my head where they've gone in and done that. At the same time, we do have investors that, have continuously shown that. Same way, if you have somebody who says, hey, I understand what you're seeing, but here are the 5 places I've sold in the last year where I've set those trends. I mean, we are very fortunate to be able to be common sense lenders as well. So we'll take all of that into consideration. But generally speaking, I love that you're explaining the top of the market piece. And I hope people are grasping that, because it is, I would say, never necessarily wise to think, well, I have the biggest house on the block. It's going to be the best house on the block, and therefore it will sell for the most that anything's ever sold in a 1 mile radius. That, even generally speaking, from an investor perspective, like, I would never recommend that. I'm not going to go buy the biggest house on the block. I don't want to flip that one. I want to flip the houses that look and feel maybe slightly better than the rest.
Yeah.
If you'd agree. But, going and picking up that house that had an addition put on it, likely unpermitted, a few years back, and thinking, well, hey, I'm going to get that huge pop because there's 500 extra square feet. If nobody else has proven that in that area, I don't recommend being the one going after.
Don't bank on it.
Yeah. Don't try to prove that you're the one for that. Distance. Okay. This is huge. Yeah. Take the deep breath. This is a really, really big one. I would say too, maybe in order of these slides, like, we start with that general radius before we start picking off the properties generally. No?
Yeah.
I do when I come. I kind of
I go out and I kind of keep coming in.
There's always the flex.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the biggest discrepancy, I guess you could say, is why we stick to a mile is, well, I'll start with the appraiser mindset. So we generally want to stick to the same, it says right here, stick to the same subdivision, 3 beds, 2 baths, trying to match those up. HOA, school district, all these things can change in value, but appraisers go until they can find something. So if I have a house that's 2 miles, if I don't have anything within a mile, well, guess what? They're going to go 2 miles. If I don't have anything that's within 180 days, guess what? An appraiser is going to go 365. Right. Again, we're not in the business of going to find something until it makes sense. I want to know exactly what the data is based off the area. So typically within a mile, I mean, it really depends on how big your subdivision is, but we don't want to be crossing over into different subdivisions that are zoned to different schools, whether, I use simple resources like greatschools.org, where it tells you, hey, this is a 2. And then if you cross over this subdivision into, section 3, well, now it's an 8 school. I think people are going to be a little bit more desired to go into that higher school district. So values.
And you can see those values.
Yes,
jump.
you can see the values jump. It's pretty obvious.
The way that you're in your state or city may be different than in most of the areas that you seem to be basically consistent with what it looks like here in Houston everywhere we find, or
I mean, it's really case by case.
Yeah. So but that's something to be cognizant of, especially if you are somebody who's looking to become an out-of-state investor. Don't overlook something like that. Maybe the school districts don't dictate prices. Here in Houston, in our own backyard, I mean, it is absolute night and day. It can be from one side of the street to the next sometimes, because you don't know where that line is, right? So that's something to really drive home with for sure. That's a good resource, that website.
Yeah, I would say the mile radius. I mean, I'll take my little radius drawer and say, I'll even go 0.5, because the closer you are, the better. Those are just going to be stronger comps for you. But typically when you start going outside of a mile, it's inevitable that you're going into new subdivisions, you're crossing over highways, you're going into just different parts. So we try to stay as secular as possible there. So,
right. I want to elaborate on this piece, because Mike touched on the difference between, especially, I would say, the distance, but even some of the other concessions that a traditional appraiser will do. It's important to keep in mind I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here, but forgive me, on any transaction as an investor, you're going to have experts that you're relying on for your information. So whether that be an appraiser, a realtor, the seller, or the wholesaler that you're getting the property from, then you have your lender and a title company, XYZ. There are people that are going to be a part of your transaction who have everything to gain and nothing to lose from participating. And then there's going to be people like your lender who have literal skin in the game on how the project runs. And so we see it time and time again where sometimes the loudest voice in the room is the person, I always say it, who has nothing to lose on this project. So you think of how maybe a wholesaler is running numbers on this. They're going to try and pick the most favorable comparables that they can to support the numbers that they want to see. The same thing with an appraiser. An appraiser is employed to pick a number, find a number on something. But if they don't have that 1 mile radius figured out, or they need to go higher bed bath count, I've never seen an appraiser come back, and I'm sure it happens, I've yet to see it though, where they just say, hey, there's not enough supporting comps here, I don't have a value to give you. So at a certain point, you make so many exceptions that, in my opinion, the number's basically fairy dust. It's made up. If you're 6 miles out and 2 years back, what is that really telling you? Your lender is always going to err on the side of being a little bit more conservative. And that's something to consider as well. Ideally, I would love our investors to think, hey, if Flipco says this is going to sell for $250 and that's what they're seeing, hopefully that's a worst case scenario, and somewhere between maybe what we would say and your wholesaler or your realtor, who don't necessarily have anything to lose on the deal, they may be on the other end of the spectrum. Not everybody. I'm painting with a broad stroke here.
But they want the listing.
Of course, that's what their business is. But I feel really passionate about this piece, especially in comparison to third-party appraisers, because we have those conversations in-house even, hey, other people are using third parties. Is that something we would consider? Why do we not do that? And at the end of the day, that third-party appraiser, John, who, if he misses the mark 7 times, there's no accountability. He gives us the appraisal. We never get to call him back and say, John, what were you thinking? This place would have never sold for that price, and now we just lent based on it, right? Mike's here day in and day out, seeing how our portfolio is performing. He's in it with our investors. So that's a really important part. We're never trying to work against our investors. We really are trying to set them up for success, because if they succeed, we succeed.
I think one of the biggest things that we even ask ourselves, and we've had the conversation time and time again, is when we look at something, we literally ask each other, would you do this deal? And if one of our core values is by investor for investor, so we really take that mindset and approach into each deal, because again, if you do a deal and there's no meat on the bone, you're not going to come back for a second deal. We want to build relationships with people. Mm-hmm. We want you to actually succeed. We want to get those payoff statements and get the reviews where it's like, hey, I made 30 grand on this deal, not, hey, I'm barely scraping by to get this one done. So we not in the business just doing deals to do them. We want to see people win, want to see people succeed. So that's a big portion.
Big difference with Flipco. So this is an example. We have a little bit of time. If you want to kind of explain, I don't know if y'all can see my mouse on here, but even just using, if this was our target property here in red, where I'm assuming we're just going out to these main thoroughways here, and then keeping track of what the rest of these subdivisions look like, the blue being those would be comps that you would find appealing. Is that fair?
Yeah, this is even a great picture here, because I would personally say that sometimes, you have to go in and look, because different subdivisions have different sections on how they were built out. But even where you see the lake, those houses that are technically on the lake could sell for potentially more than the houses to the east, where it kind of splits. You can see it may be a totally different subdivision and a totally different builder. You really just don't know. So you have to go in there and see actually what's going on. But again, if you draw a line down the middle and all houses are 3,500 square foot, and you take one to the west that's on the lake, and then one to the east, and there's a $50,000 swing, same bed count, same bath count, each don't have a pool, 2-car garage. Inevitably, you would have to think, even if it's the same school district and you go through all the bullet points and you consistently see that,
it's a pattern.
Yeah. So you would be able to say, hey, it sounds like this lake view, which would make sense. I get it. I would want a lake view as well than just being in a subdivision. So those things you have to account for if you can see the data and if you can actually prove it that there is value there or not value there. So that's actually a great picture.
What this actually reminded me of as well, and we don't have a specific slide to it, but it's super important, is looking for things that you would have to either, again, look for a pattern to discount or add, value to. So pond, Lakeview, sure. Golf courses, commercial. That was what I was thinking. It could be the same subdivision, but and I will say I'm salty about this because I flipped a house that has commercial behind it. Full transparency, terrible idea. Don't do it. Still own it. It's not a flip, it's a rental now. Pivot. But those things make a huge difference. When I'll be, again, first to admit, when we underwrote that property, I didn't consider the impact of what the, directly behind that house looked like or was occupied by. And it made a huge difference when it was time to come and sell. What are some of the other things to look for? Like commercial, yes, but what about parks, churches, schools?
I mean, really, it's going to come down to the buyer. I think in my head, I try to think about everything to where if it is school, okay. One of the benefits is that if you want to go to that school, you're right across the street.
Sure.
One of the cons is at 3:00 or 2:45, you'll have
Sure.
lines of parents outside.
Mm-hmm.
You may like the Friday Night Lights or the marching band blaring their music at nighttime practicing, but you may not if you're across from a high school. If you're on a main 2-lane or 4-lane road where there are the yellow lines that subdivide it, I would say cars whizzing by and not having the comfortability of like, hey, my kids can just go play in the front of the yard. Granted, it's tough. Again, it's tough to put an actual, that we have to discount that by $10,000, but I think your buyer pool is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and the more cons that there are. So again, you don't know who's going to buy this house, but you have to think about everything from the lender's perspective to go, hey, this guy's in a 6-month loan. He's been unable to sell it. He needs, now a second 3-month extension that he didn't account for. It's more interest payments and it's extension fee. So again, you just have to put it into consideration and calculate those things out to make sure that you're putting yourself in the best position to not get stuck, not have to turn it into a rental, whatever the case may be. But still, you just have to think about these things. Everything matters. But again, it is tough to say, hey, one of the biggest things is people that are next to commercial or adjacent with a gas station. I would consider that a con. Some people may say, awesome, I can get gas really quickly there. But
saying that.
I think that, probably not, but I don't know. They may. But simply just having the traffic and being across from a gas station to me would not be a benefit. It would definitely be a con. I think it is tough to say what percentage you then discount that for. Somewhere in the 5 to 10% range is what I'm typically at.
I say it all the time. Underwriting these properties, and contrary to an appraiser who thinks it's more of, I think they think it's a math equation always. Like I look at our team constantly, I'm like, this is an art and not a science, right?
Yeah.
So it's keeping in mind too, understanding who your end buyer is likely to be makes a big difference.
Yep.
So if you're banking on, hey, this house is going to sell for $350 like everything else in the neighborhood, and it's going to be, it's a 4-3, so it's going to be a family, all of these things. And then you go and look at it and realize, well, it's on the corner entering the subdivision where you've got that 4-lane thoroughway. Like, okay, sure, families will want a house in that subdivision because of the school district and the size. Nobody, generally speaking, those same families don't want to be on that road.
Yeah.
So
You
have to be cognizant of that. And everything will sell at a price.
Yeah.
It will. But don't be so overzealous that you love this property. Don't fall in love with the deal out the gate, trying to make those numbers work. Where, my example that I use as a great learning experience for everybody, I was wrong in loving that property. For one of the reasons why I did is because of the proximity to the office. I was like, this will be very easy to manage as a flip. It isn't a great neighborhood, don't get me wrong, but I thought it was a great idea because of how close it was to the office. That shouldn't have impacted my choice. And frankly, it made no difference. I never went to the flip while it was being flipped, nor do I go there now. So it might as well be in a different city, frankly. It's true.
Yeah.
We're being very transparent here, everybody. Feel free to chime in if you've made some blunders along the way.
Yeah. Are there any questions to this
So
point?
far?
We'll give it like 10 seconds, see if anything pops up. No.
All right. We'll do questions too at the end, or feedback if you'll have anything. So this is more, again, getting into the art and not the science when you're really narrowing down how to pick those comps out. I think a lot of this too probably ties back to what you guys look at on the rehab budget. Yes.
Yeah, I would say similar style finishes is going to be the biggest thing. If you have a house and you're planning to put on granite, you said to mention this before, but every house has quartz. You're probably going to be at a disadvantage if you're keeping the old cabinets, but someone else has replaced with all shaker white style and they're brand new pulls and you're refinishing them. People can pick up on those things. Even down, I hate to say it, but even down to the appliances, if you cheap out on the appliances sometimes and everybody else's appliance package in the area is, that $8,000 to $10,000 range. Like people pick up on that. They can feel the cheap flooring that you walk on. If you're going to go laminate instead of LVP, I would just, again, be very careful with that. Even to the smallest details, of course, we're talking big ticket items like roofs, foundation, AC, HVAC, plumbing, electrical, making sure that that's all done and permitted correctly at times.
Yes.
In the correct area. But, painting the exterior, doing new shutters, doing a new driveway, it's small things like that. If you go the extra mile, will definitely, if it's in the budget, doing some landscaping, making sure the property is clean, like you would live there and be able to live there tomorrow when you're actually showing these properties. It all matters at the end of the day. So yeah, you just have to be super, super cognizant of that.
I think it is also important. Again, and we don't really have an idea of the investors that we have on this call right now. So a lot of this is very general and generic, but understanding if you were in the market and you were flipping like we were lending back in 21 and 22 versus now, very different. That's the reason why we don't go 2 years back on comps, right? If somebody was able to just, frankly, people didn't even have to do anything in 22, they could hold the house for 6 months and make a profit.
Yep.
But, we saw investors who got into the market in 22, slapped paint on the wall and changed, carpet, like maybe
Back on.
some new poles, you're all
Yep.
set, right? And they were making bank on those houses, frankly. We're not in that market anymore. Again, niches maybe still, but by and large, anywhere we're lending, we are seeing the markets be a little bit more balanced. I wouldn't say they're a full buyer's market everywhere necessarily, but I would definitely say buyers are able to walk multiple houses and make choices based on things like, I don't like this flooring as much, or I don't like that appliance package as much. Whereas before it was like you just didn't have that flexibility, right?
Yeah, no option period, multiple offers, highest and best due at 5 o'clock. Just not ideal. Not ideal for buyers, but very ideal for flippers.
Oh, it was a good time. For sure. Well, it was still rough though, because trying to buy a house back then to flip was painful. So there's good and bad that come with it, but keeping in mind too, if you were flipping back then and you're getting back into it, we've had a handful of investors come to us and that was their circumstance. We make sure to, that's part of getting to know our borrowers, whether they're brand new today, what got them interested in flipping, have they flipped before, and then when were they flipping? Because we want them to understand that the markets are going to look different. We also ask different questions than we did back then because we're learning, again, because we're holding these properties through their entire, through the entire process. We get to see what it eventually sells for. We get to see what the project looks like the whole time. Everything that our investors do, everything we've done, then we get to see what our investors do. We're pouring back into the new borrowers the same way we are even right now doing this. Year built. So what's our parameters for that?
So typically we try to keep it within 30 to 40 years. That's strictly because major ticket items have changed over the years, whether that be from, aluminum to copper wiring, electrical, back in the 50s and 60s. Typically, if you have an 80s to 90 build, all those things are going to be different and you'll see values start to change. The biggest distinction I'd say on what we're seeing now is a lot more of like early 2000 builds that are coming through that we're lending on.
That makes sense.
But even with that, that's where it kind of shrinks up for me because it's like a 2002 build is very different than a 2024 build.
It's also really different from like 1985.
Yes.
Which is not a huge.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we try to keep it within 30 to 40 years. Granted, if I have a 1915 build and someone has gone down to the studs, kept one exterior or one interior wall and absolutely redone everything, here in Houston, you can actually consider that a new construction by some standards. But if everything's been done entirely brand new, we will flex that out to maybe even 50 or 60 years just because it makes sense to, because everything's brand new done.
Common sense.
Yes.
Common sense underwriting.
But typically, if I'm comping a 1950 build, I will not be comping a 1995 build because it's an entirely different house. And those are more desirable. I would think people sometimes would want to go towards a newer style house than unless something's being entirely redone where you have all new electrical, all new plumbing, all new HVAC, a new roof, foundation, everything like that. So again, just trying to find those parameters and keep it as close as possible to that to make sure you're actually comparing to similar houses. So you will see values change. So you have to take it into account.
I think too, once you're getting to know, we keep saying this, know your niche, know your own markets, understanding when certain things started to change over in building code there. So here, for example, we know like if something was built before 1972, the plumbing is going to be very different. We kind of use that as a gauge, but the plumbing is going to be very different. It may be within a 5-year range. And if you don't know the difference of saying, well, hey, you still have full cast versus, well, they started to switch over to copper here. If you don't know the difference between those two things, as Mike is saying, and you don't have that built into your budget, or if it hasn't been updated already, our underwriters will look at that, and we're trained to be able to say, hey, do you know, like, you don't have anything in here for electrical, you don't have anything in here for rough plumbing. Do you know if that's been updated in the past? Because based on the year of your house, it doesn't matter if there's comps that are within a 5-year time frame that support the price if we know that all of those comps have the updated electrical or plumbing, right?
Yeah, and we look for that too.
Yeah.
But just making sure that you're not, again, why we do that is because on the flip side of that, we have investors that get into a project, start replacing, a P-trap under the sink, and they don't snake the property, check out all the plumbing.
Right.
And then they're calling us saying, hey, my cast iron plumbing just entirely cracked. I have to tunnel under the house. It's going to cost me 15 grand. We work with borrowers as best as we can, but having only $5,000 allocated to plumbing, and now you're talking an increase of $15,000 to replace all the supply lines from the city, that's a problem. Your profits change.
Right.
Your time in the project is going to change. So just, again, you have to take that into account and think about every little detail when you're going into this, because again, a lot of these investors are buying these houses as is, waiving inspection periods and not doing them all together. You may take an option period, but a lot of people don't. That's a lot of time. That's how you get the deal, by waiving the option period and going under contract as fast as possible. So
knowing how to do that due diligence up front, and these are like little tidbits of things that you can be looking for along the way, for sure. So all things considered, I'm sure a handful of you are probably asking, okay, great, you showed us your nice map, we know all the parameters we want to underwrite to, but if I jump on Zillow, it's not going to let me filter by all of the things that Mike Kennedy just told me to do.
Yeah.
So what are the resources that you like to use? What do you recommend from an investor perspective? What do you think that they should be using to do this?
Yeah, I would say stop using Zillow. That would be my first tidbit, because there's ranges on that. Sometimes there's not, but it is state by state. The best thing I think you can possibly do if you don't want to actually invest in a software or a service would be teaming up with a realtor. Again, we've talked about, the different ways people pull comps as far as wholesalers and realtors do. I'm not saying all realtors are like this. I'm a real estate agent myself and have my license. But at the end of the day, teaming up with one that can actually show you, go into their local MLS, maybe you're purchasing from out of state or you're local and you just want to see what's going on, going into the actual MLS and making sure that those comps are exactly what they said they are based off Zillow, if you're using that already. Because you'll just get the most accurate information as possible. So that would be my number one thing is, one, stop using online websites like that. Team up with a local realtor that can actually give you the correct data, and making sure that they're comping to your parameters that you want. So they may go back a year and you're saying, hey, I really only want you to go back 3 months. Give them the parameters, take control of the deal itself. And if you want to go really, really specific, we have 3 resources here. We personally use 2 of them, actually use 3 of them when necessary, but Home Genius Real Estate is pretty much a software that IDXs every single MLS across the country. So if we have a house in California, Oregon, New Jersey, Florida, you will get all the data from that MLS. You don't have to go out and find realtors in local areas to make sure if you're, flipping in multiple states. Richer Values will do the same. They will go IDX from different places, but the only difference with that is actually their appraisals that they pull are nationally recognized as a third-party appraisal as well, which is pretty cool. So at the end of the day, that's a nice little, something to have in your back pocket. And House Canary, I'm the least familiar with this one, but it's pretty much the same as the other 2 before. I think it's price-wise, it's a little bit less of a pull than Home Genius and Richer Values. Both of those are going to be more of in like the $1,000 ranges. But if you're flipping at volume and you're flipping in multiple states, I would say it's a no-brainer. But if you're local to Houston or Atlanta, whatever the case may be, team up with a realtor. You're going to need one anyways, right? Because they're going to have to list the property at some point. Make sure they're competent, challenge them. But I would say teaming up with a local realtor, and then using the resources on the screen if necessary. So
I would say based on those 3 resources, the biggest difference is in terms of getting like off the ground running. Home Genius and Richer Values does take a little bit of a lift in terms of like signing up and getting onboarded to something, and then paying more of like a monthly subscription, which makes sense at volume, and which is why we use that predominantly. House Canary does allow you to just pay per pull. It's about $15 to $17. Maybe you wouldn't want to be using it on every single time you're looking at a property, but I would say it's important to use these resources as a trust but verify.
Yep.
One other thing to add about working with a realtor, and that I think is really important. Again, sometimes we talk in broad strokes about them pulling comps from wherever they want, but you should be able to find a realtor who specializes working with investors. When I was licensed back in Ontario, same as Mike, it took me a year to realize I do not like retail real estate. loved the investment side of it and never looked back. And there are other realtors, and especially in every MSA, that are going to be able to specialize in that and rely on their expertise. So on my flips, I've stayed in touch. The realtor that helped me acquire the property is going to be the same realtor ideally that you use to sell it. And so they too should be invested in your journey through that flip, in giving you feedback about, hey, I know when we first looked at this house, you planned on putting in LVP. I've seen 3 other houses come up. They all have hardwood. Let's see if we can get that put in there. These actives are coming, like, they should be watching those markets in anticipation of your listing coming up for you. And that's where, on one end, it could just be, random comps. On the other side, you could have a realtor who's really in it with you. And that's what you should be striving to find in these areas.
I would say one of the biggest things with that is the inspection period. So when you go under contract, obviously you hope that they're a competent negotiator and they can get you the best price. That's a big thing when it comes to profits. But the inspection period, when you get a 52-page inspection report in front of you, can that realtor read that inspection report and understand the construction side of the business, to make sure that, if a buyer's coming in and saying, hey, I want $10,000 to concessions, they can rip through that and go, no, because we did A, B, and C, this is actually up to code. This was taken care of. Because of course, the buyer is going to try to get the best deal possible, but having a realtor that knows and understands construction as well as the inspection reports would be a really big key thing for me as well.
Yeah. So you're not looking, like, if this is a business for you, don't go and look for a realtor who specializes in rentals, like,
or new construction, which may help, but
right. But it's no different than saying, well, hey, I'm having an eyesight problem, I'm going to go to the dentist. Like, doctors specialize in things, realtors specialize as well. And then finally, we went through a lot of this already, the difference in looking for your 3 comps, not ignoring any sort of trends that you're seeing, and just that idea of not outweighing sort of what we're seeing bigger picture. Anything that you want to add to that as we wrap that up? No?
I think so.
Okay.
We've covered a majority of it.
That's wonderful. Well, that is it for our comp how-to FYI with Flipco. We do have 10 more minutes open for questions, feedback. Again, happy to share these slides as well. None of this is proprietary. And really, it helps us, the better equipped y'all are to be running your comps, the quicker you're going to come to us with everything already all set. So we love that when we're underwriting your deal as well. We will do that. Thanks, Luke. We can see all of your questions in real time. Okay, so how the appraiser appraises the property without there being a duplex, triplex sold within a year or so. Good question.
It's a great question. Well,
we just talked about this.
They just go back farther and farther and farther. So, of course, for us, that was one thing that we actually did not disclose, because there's less inventory of those. We actually will go back a year, up to a year, on duplexes and triplexes. Anytime there's going to be less of them, you have to go back a little bit farther.
There's less volatility, I think,
for sure,
on those properties.
But I would say the appraiser is going to go back. Their parameters are until they can actually find something. So if they can't go back a year, they'll go back 2 years. If they go back 2 years and they can't find something within 2 years, they'll go 3 years. If something's not within a mile, they'll go 2 miles. To where I think if you're going that far out, you're really talking about 2 different properties. And we're not trying to find a value to get it there. We're trying to find the true value based off certain parameters. So I would say that's the biggest thing. They're gonna go till they find something, whether that's radius or time back. We're gonna go as realistically it makes sense to go back, and as far out that it makes sense. But at a certain point, if it's not a deal, it's not a deal. So We're always going to consider that as well.
To touch on the piece where you're referring specifically to duplexes, triplexes, multifamily in general, we do comp that slightly differently than we are a single family property though. Right. So we'll use many of the same parameters, but with those multifamilies, we will take into consideration what the rental rates are in those areas and use that to support what values we see. Now, easy peasy. If we see that in the same, 1 mile radius, you follow all these conditions and you've got 3 duplexes that have sold for $250K around the same size, all of that, that's easy. But what we can do otherwise is, hey, if you have two multifamilies that have sold and it appears as if they're selling for, let's say, $150 a door, and then you take a look at what those rental rates were, you can kind of back into the numbers to say, well, we think that this duplex is going to rent for $1,200 a month. and then use some of the parameters and assumptions from those other properties. So there is a little bit more that can go into those, because most areas is not, and that's the other part too. And again, like we could do a whole other one on how to underwrite to an exit strategy, probably just on that topic. But if somebody plans to refinance it, we can look at the numbers a little bit differently. Do you plan on selling it? And is your purchaser going to be another investor or somebody who's going to be an owner occupant? So we'll take all of that into consideration.
I would suggest it, as I talked about earlier. I like to see trends. So I will start with 12 months and I will see what the difference is from 12, 9, 6 to 3. I know that's a process, but it is our job to make sure that we get the closest values. I think 6 months is always going to be the best. I mean, of course, 3 months is always going to be the best. The last 30 days is always going to be the best, but I think the 6 month range is going to be the safest right now. Again, it really just also comes down to personally the type of investor that you are. If you're comfortable with, swinging for the fences and going back, a full 12 months because you're willing to hold the property, even though, the days on market might be a little higher, you may be able to handle that risk. I typically only like to flip houses that I know can sell within 30 to 45 days. And that's just my personal risk tolerance because, I'm paying interest, I'm paying utilities, it costs money to just hold the house with nobody in it or not renting anything out. So yes, I would suggest 6 months, but again, you want to go back as far as you can, 12 months to 9 months, because if 12 months ago it was selling for 250 and then 9 months it's for 230 and then 6 months it's 210 and now you're looking at houses that are active on the market at 195, there's a clear trend that this specific subdivision is trending down. You have to take that into account. So granted, you might meet in the middle. You say, hey, 6 months was 225, we're at 195, I'm going to call it 210 to 215, just building that in, that buffer for yourself and being a little bit more conservative. But yes, I would say 6 months is the best, but look at the full picture. Look for trends. Look for
that's
patterns.
Exactly it. So. Yeah. And the biggest thing with that is in a more stable market. And the only way to determine if that specific area is stable is to look at the bigger picture first.
Yeah.
And then work from there.
This is a really good one. And I think it's actually, it's kind of tough to say because if you have 2 stories are typically going to be a little bit bigger, obviously, because it's more than one home, depending on the lot size, doesn't have to be. But for me personally, again, I'm not going to try to guess and put a dollar amount on it until I can see an actual trend. So if I have a 2,200 square foot house, it's a 1 story. They're both updated, very similar, the same. And in this subdivision, 2 stories seem to sell for a little bit more. I'll account for that, but I don't think, I personally, it's personal preference. I would say I would rather live in a 1 story to 2 story home, but I'm not everybody. But unless I can see that the values are actually there and that the data backs it, I don't think we can just sit here and say, well, a 2 story is always going to sell for more, or a 1 story is always going to sell for more. Again, you have to be data driven, or else you're kind of guessing.
Right.
And at the end of the day, we are kind of guessing in general. We're taking previous data to determine a future value. So not trying to do that again and again, and using the data as best as possible would be my answer to that. So,
and I think that question is going to vary greatly from one market, neighborhood, subdivision to the next. So you can't really use a broad stroke there.
Yep.
We got you, David. We'll share them for sure. We do this all manually, Peter. So the websites that we shared are definitely help with the lift. And it's really the reason why we have 3 different ones is frankly, even in-house, Home Genius is our go-to. I personally use House Canary if I'm trying to comp something out before I send it to the underwriting team, or if I'm curious about a property. Some of our other team members prefer richer values. So I don't think, ideally the data should be the same across the board. Yeah. It's just a matter of how you like to filter through it, what you're more comfortable with. But we do not rely on any AI generated valuations. Actually, I should say though, I know House Canary does. I'm sure Richer Values does as well. You can put an address in there and it will spit out a number at you. So there are all of this software is technically AI driven, but we don't rely on those values.
It's up to the person using to drill it down as much as possible. Of course, we just type in an address and then it pulls you up to the map and gives you a 1 mile radius off the bat because we've set it to that. So yes, the software does help. There's not a huge AI component for us, but I'm sure time and time again, there'll be more stuff that comes out that will be able to help us do that, is not pull that manual lift that we are right now. So,
and we're seeing, again, a bit of a tangent here, but like we're seeing huge changes in the data that is available to just layman people. So when I think back to when we first started underwriting with Flipco, a huge struggle for us was figuring out how we would push into other markets because we didn't even have the data that we have available now. And there's all kinds of noise going on just in the real estate world and in terms of MLS and who is going to own that data going forward. Being careful to understand that wherever you're getting this data from as well is not from county tax records. We've gone through that. County tax records are obviously not going to give you fair sales data. It's not accurate. So make sure you're not using a software that provides from there. That just getting started with investing. I'd like to hear more about the lending options you offer. Yeah. That's great, Lynn. If you can use this QR code, anybody, to see all of our contact cards. And then when we share this slide deck, I'll make sure to include like our direct contact information there as well. Thank you. Very true. Yeah. I mean, look, if I'm driving around and somebody calls me and throws an address at me, I'm gonna pop that into Google and just give it the quickest sniff test. Because frankly, if you're like 100K off one way or the other from what Zillow's telling me, I can at least rely on it enough to go, well, that doesn't seem to make much sense. But yeah. Yes. Yeah. Actually, I've played with Propelio before. I agree that for Texas, they've really done a lot on the data side. I haven't looked at them lately. Actually, it's probably been about a year. We haven't, as a team, leaned into it too hard just because we're in so many other markets that it doesn't kind of cover all of our bases. But for people on the call that are from Texas, Propelio is a great tool. Anything else? Right. I mean, that's sort of what we were saying. The tools and resources that we shared a few slides back, you can access all of that information. And from what we've seen, it has been reliable. We do sort of like a fact checking process as well. If even a realtor is telling us, hey, no, that property sold for a certain price, we'll go back in and see. I can't say that all data is always 100% accurate, but we heavily rely on obviously the data that we're getting from these resources. But your local realtor who can pull up that local MLS listing and confirm for you is going to be really reliable. Keeping in mind, like, I mean, this is going the extra mile, but if something sells on MLS for $250,000, that's what's going to be recorded as the sales price. We don't have a way of knowing if there was a $20,000 kickback to the buyer on that, which would obviously scale what that purchase price was, but by and large, it should be accurate.
Also, again, if you're using a realtor, make sure that you set the parameters of what you want to see. They may go back a year, but you only want to go back 3 to 6 months. That's up to you and your risk tolerance again. But again, if you're going to use a local realtor, make sure that you're setting those parameters for them so they understand what to do and how far to go back. So you're very welcome.
Anything else before we wrap? I do believe will be emailed the list of attendees. Like Flipco will receive the list of everybody who's registered, and so we can send that out to you directly, or Real Estate IQ can send that to you. Ideally, we'll be able to send it so that you'll have our direct contact info. But again, if you take a picture of that QR code, that will send you to our link page. You'll see as soon as you pull it up, you're going to see Matt Valenti, who runs our business development group, but myself, Mike, and as well as Alessandra are on there as well, who leads originations. Oh, we lend throughout all of Florida. Is there a reason why we don't do Palm Beach that I'm not aware of? No. Okay, no, all Florida. As long as you have comps. And you have comps.
We got comps.
That's the best way to wrap it up. As long as there's comps, we're gonna lend there if it's in Florida. Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, so there is a slide. When you get the slide deck, you'll see the 3 websites that we recommend using for your comparables.
All right.
All right.
Thank y'all very much.
Thank you.